This episode is brought to you by Santos Threads. Make sure to visit Santos-Threads for the latest and greatest in men's and women's Latino urban-inspired streetwear. Visit SANTOS-THREADS.com. Hey, you are now listening to the Santos Says podcast, episode number 42. Once again, coming through here once again with you. It's Santos, proud owner of Santos Threads. Happy to be with you guys once more. I'm looking forward to this one right here. We have, man, time goes by fast when you're having fun. We're up to episode 42 now. And I want to invite you guys to check out santos-threads.com. We got the spring collection right now. Sign up, get 15% off your first purchase when you sign up there. Just want to make sure. Also, make sure to follow me on social media, Instagram, Santos Thread Shop, TikTok, Santos Thread Shop. If you are watching on YouTube, please hit the like, subscribe, comment, share with your friends, the whole thing. On this episode, I will have a very special guest, of course, because all my guests are very special guests. I will have a very special guest. Obviously, you know, a lot of people know, especially if you reside in New York City, there are a lot of elections coming up, or New York State rather as well. There are elections coming up June 28th, and so with that upon us, I've been able to make great connections, and I have another guest from the public service / political realm. This person is named Angel Vasquez. Another person who's in public service, Angel Vasquez. He is running for New York State Senate. And he represents the area of Washington Heights, Upper West Side, Marble Hill, Inwood, Manhattanville, that whole district up there in Manhattan. And we're going to have him come on here because he's a very interesting guest, because this person has a very unconventional story, which I will allow him to tell. He is an educator. He comes from that realm of education, and a strong advocate for Latino rights and for higher education as well for Latinos. So I'm very interested in having him here. I had to have him on here. He's going to have his, obviously, June 28th, he's going to have, he's running for, he's a Democrat running for New York State Senate, and he will be joining me momentarily. And I want him to talk about his thoughts. I want to get his thoughts on not only where we stand, you know, on the city, as far as his district where he serves, his region. Not only that, the state of the city right now, New York, but what are some of his plans to kind of help push New York City forward, right? I think a lot of people feel that New York City has kind of, with obviously the pandemic and a lot of things going on, the economic instability in a lot of, you know, regards. I'm curious and I'm very fascinated to have his take on not only what he would do to resolve a lot of the issues that are going on now, but also a lot of his background and getting his story, because as I alluded to, he has a very interesting background. He comes from an education background, and he's a strong advocate for Latinos in higher education and much more. And I will let him tell it as he is here behind the scenes, and I will have him, without further ado, this person is running for New York State Senate come June 28th. Obviously, a Democrat for New York State Senate, represents the Washington Heights, Inwood, Manhattanville, Upper West Side, that whole region. He's a fellow Latino like myself. I will let him tell his story. And without further delay, I would like to welcome over here to the Santos Says podcast, Angel Vasquez.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Enjoying this wonderful spring weather that we're having today. I'm good. Out there campaigning.
You know, I'm telling you, it's been, right, as you know, here in the city, it's been like winter came back. It was like a blast from the past.
It's been a cold spring, right? I think we want that moment in time in New York City where the switch flips and it's nice and warm and we can go out and brunch and have a good time in the parks. But it's been a cold spring for sure.
So before we start, right, I was kind of like, I was torn because obviously I looked you up. I found out you were gracious enough we had great dialogues offline, which I really appreciate you coming on. I was torn as far as this part, right? I was like, should I refer to him as Angel Vasquez, which is proper, right? As you know, a Latino, right? In Spanish, that's proper, or
Yeah.
Angel Vasquez. But I did see a lot of your videos, and you do, for obvious reasons, right? It's easier for a lot of non-Spanish speaking people to say Angel. So which one do you prefer, Angel or Angel, or does it not matter?
We can go with Angel. I mean, really, the story behind that is that my name is Angel Vasquez, right? Like in Spanish,
Right.
it's Angel. But my parents immigrated here when I was 4 years old to the United States, and in school, all my educators anglicized my name, and they all called me Angel. And then from that moment on, as a kid, you start internalizing that, and that's what you become more comfortable with. Whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing to do, that's a whole different conversation for us to have. But since then, I've become very accustomed to my anglicized version of my name, which is Angel.
Absolutely. You know what? That's great. That was a wonderful transition. So we'll just continue from there. Um, So that's very interesting. I looked into your history. I saw some of your stories, and obviously, I want you to tell it as far as from that point where you mentioned 4 years old. Talk to me about that point where you were kind of battling that as far as right, the anglicizing, fitting in as a Latino. Talk to me about that. Your experience growing up in New York City. Tell your story.
Yeah, no. So, my family immigrated from the Dominican Republic when I was 4 years old. We settled up in Washington Heights, in the lower part of Washington Heights. So, stayed in the one, particularly on 161st Street. And it was the 90s in New York City. That was a really tough time, particularly in Upper Manhattan. Thinking through the war on drugs, the amount of drugs that were also being dealt with in the streets of the city. I remember growing up, my block in particular used to be closed off, so cars couldn't go in or out. We had police checkpoints on each end of the block just to keep trying to maintain some level of safety for students. That was the New York City that I grew up in, right? And that was the New York City that my parents found when they immigrated here. My mom started off as an office cleaner. My dad was a factory worker and then became a taxi driver eventually. And for them, they came to this country really seeking an American dream, right? Like they came to this country for the betterment of their family and for the betterment of myself and my younger brother. And so they worked and they worked and they worked. Us immigrants, Latinos, Dominicans, we come to this country and and our parents, they instill within us this like a crazy sense of work ethic, right? They were able to buy their own home. And so eventually we did move to Teaneck, New Jersey, where I finished high school. So I started off my education here in New York City, but my parents found their way over to Teaneck because, again, that was their version of the American dream for my brother and myself, right? That's what they came here seeking. But, going to school in New York did put me behind academically. And I didn't really realize how behind I was until I went over to Teaneck and I felt myself struggling. To be able to keep up with a lot of my students. And I noticed that myself, I had an achievement gap, right? Like as a 13-year-old, I wasn't astute enough to say, oh, I have an achievement gap here, right? Like you're not there
Oh,
yet.
of course not.
But as an adult looking back, I did realize that I was far behind a lot of my peers, but I did whatever I took, that sense of, work ethic and perseverance and determination that my parents had instilled within me. I took that and I ran with it. And I caught myself up and I was able to graduate and I went to Cornell University, which is an Ivy League school here in the United States. For me, I say that now with arrogance. I say that with pride in the sense that my parents came here, right? Somebody who was cleaning an office building and somebody who was a taxi driver in the streets of New York and were able to, raise a kid that manages to get into an Ivy League school in this country. That's a huge triumph. And I credit my parents for that amazing experience. So I went to Cornell and I studied industrial and labor relations. That's really the study of the workplace, study of labor unions. And that's where I was like, okay, I got this golden ticket to Cornell University, right? I walked in and I'm like, I think I'm gonna go become an international investment banker because I gotta make money, right? I come from a third world country. I'm an immigrant from the streets of New York City. I got to go out there and I got to make some money. And what I realized studying industrial and labor relations was like, no. Like, my family's struggle is so much of the struggle in the labor movement, right? Like it's Black and brown people that are part of that labor movement. We are that working class that keeps this entire city, state, and country really running day to day. And so I was like, I can't go become the man. I got to go be a champion for the people. And so I decided that I was going to take a route in public service instead. After I graduated from Cornell, I became a teacher. And I taught middle school English, 7th grade reading, 8th grade Socratic seminar. One of the most beautiful experiences of my life was being in front of those students. And really, and my students were predominantly low income immigrant students. It was in Denver, Colorado, but nevertheless, like, while it was in Denver, the struggle of Latinos out there is so similar to the struggles of Latino here, regardless, right? And that's where I came. That opened up my eyes, like really going out to Denver and saying, like, oh, like we are all struggling across the board in so many similar ways as Latinos, regardless of whether you're Dominican, Puerto Rican, or Mexican, or wherever, and any of the other 26 Latin American countries. So I was teaching, realized that so many of the systemic inequities that we see in our classrooms are played out by government decisions, people that sit in the seat of power. And the people who sit in those seats oftentimes don't have the stories of those immigrant kids whose families are working 2 or 3 jobs, whose parents don't speak English to be able to help them out with their homework assignment or something like that. But I have that story. So I decided that I was going to go pursue public policy. I enrolled at Columbia University, and that was really important because it gave me the opportunity to come back right here to New York City. Because if I was going to start affecting change and breaking down some of those barriers that are holding back our students, I needed to be doing it in my own neighborhood and where I grew up. And so I came back to Washington Heights. I currently live across the street from my elementary school, and I came back home. I got my master's in public administration from Columbia University, and I started a career and journey in education policy. I worked at the state Senate. I negotiated our K through 12 education budget. That's like negotiating $38 billion worth of education funding for school districts across the state. I drafted pieces of legislation. I passed them into law. I wrote policy reports for the state Senate. I then became chief of staff to the former state senator in Northern Manhattan, the first Dominican woman to be elected into the state Senate, awarded $10 million worth of funding to local community-based organizations and local schools in the district. And now I work for the United Federation of Teachers, which is the city's teachers union, representing 200,000 former educators and current educators, where I manage the legislative agenda. So I go up to Albany and I go to City Hall and I say, this is what is going to be in benefit to the students of New York and the public school teachers of New York. So that's a little bit of my story and where I come from and my background.
That's amazing. And that's, one of the things, and that really seems to be over the years, it's always been a really hot topic as far as, you mentioned 2 things that are very important, right? One was obviously the education system in New York. And you mentioned how you felt, looking back in hindsight, you're like, you're thinking, hey, I feel like I was at a disadvantage this whole time. I didn't realize it when I was 13, right? And 2, the other part of economic inequality, which is, which I feel has never been more prevalent than it is right now in this moment. So what are your thoughts on those 2 particular things? Do you still, because obviously you believe it's a work in progress because of your background, and you feel like you want to be a champion of change for this. So absolutely. How do you feel, right? So what do you think needs to be done as far as to start those things, in particular for education, right? What is it that is the root issue, if anything, and how would you fix it?
Yeah, so as it relates to education, and this is what my experience as an educator in the classroom and what my experience now serving as a policy analyst at the Teachers Union tells me, is that our students are coming in with so many other societal issues that they can't even be present to receive the academic services that to their full capacity or potential. So let me give you some examples. Some students are walking in without dental insurance, for example. If they don't have good dental hygiene, that's part of your health. You're not coming in as a healthy student. Some students don't have access to vision services. If you don't have glasses, you're not reading the school board. You're not reading the board. You're not learning, right? Like, those are some of the issues that are holding back our students. Another one is, like I said, parents working 2 or 3 jobs and can't help you out with your homework assignment or can't supervise you properly over the weekends. So what happens to after school programming? All of that and weekend programming as well for students. What I would love to do is take our schools and convert them all into community schools. So the idea is where you take a professional, they're called community school directors, you put them in the school building, and their job is to assess the needs of every single student, of their parents, and also the community at large. and then leverage resources to leverage their relationships to bring in resources directly into the school building, so that parents in the community don't have to go elsewhere to find that. So, for example, if there's food scarcity, then let's establish a food pantry right inside the school building, so that parents in the community at large can access food, right? If, like I said, there's the community school director determines that there's a lack of vision services, well, let's bring an optometrist right into the school building to, do an assessment of every single student and provide them all with glasses for free. If it's dental service, let's bring the dental program right into the school building. So let's address all those other societal needs, right, that the kids come to school with, directly in the school building. And then let's allow the teachers to do the work that they need to do, which is provide the academic services. I think we also need to hire more mental health professionals in our schools. We need, there are professional ratios out there that have been set of the amount of student to social workers that are necessary, or student to school psychologists, student to guidance counselors. We don't have enough of that. It's supposed to be one social worker for every 250 students, and that's not a reality in our school district. We know that that's the ratio, but we're just not doing enough to make sure that we have hired enough social workers so that we meet those ratios, right? Because if we continue to ask our teachers to be school nurses, to be social workers, guidance counselors, and to also be the after-school supervisors, we're just not going to get the highest quality from that individual, right? What we need to make sure is that we have hired all these other professionals to be inside the school building, properly serving the students and augmenting what the teachers are already doing.
Yeah, you can't ask it's not fair. It's just not fair. You can't, you can't ask these teachers to serve all those functions. And I do realize, though, as you do as well, that there's a lot of economic factors to it as well, right? You got budgets, you have different. So how do you feel, or how do you propose something could be done as far as coming up with the funding for this? Because look, honestly, mental health professionals are not going to come cheap.
No, they're not. And the reality is that our school district is currently flush with cash, and it came because of all those stimulus bills that were drafted during the pandemic. In New York State, we finally are fully funding our foundation aid formula from the state. That's basically the state money, the money that the state gives to school districts. For years, it had been underfunded. We're finally at a place where we're completely funding that. And so there is a lot of funding that's coming to the public school district. It's a matter of now the mayor and the city and the Department of Education to make sure that they're utilizing those funds to reduce class sizes, to hire social workers, to make sure that there's a school nurse in every single building, to hire the guidance counselors. Like I'm saying, the money is there. It's about building the political will and putting the policy initiatives forward so that these individuals and these experts are actually hired inside of our school building. The money's there. We just have to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always felt that there was always a sentiment, right, of finding ways to the sentiment, I think, of the common person, if you will. Everyone is like, hey, where's all the money going, right? It's got to trickle down from somewhere. So, and it's a shame too, because, like, as you mentioned, having the larger classrooms, you have the larger classrooms, which we didn't even get into, right? You have the teachers that are spread thin. You have and then the health issues that it didn't even occur to me what you were saying, but it's something that it's a tangible thing that it makes sense. Like, if your children they don't have the insurance, they're not healthy, they can't see, they're not, how are they going to focus? How are they going to pay attention? How are you going to expect the best results in the classroom? So I think it's what you brought up, some valid points with that for sure.
No, absolutely. And listen, as it relates to the economic means, the reality is that our city continues to get more and more expensive. Part of what's driving that, at least as it relates to housing costs, for example, right? In the city of New York, we give tax breaks to private real estate developers to build market rate housing. We don't need market rate housing. What we actually need is more affordable housing. That program, the tax program that I'm referring to, is called the 421A. It was invented in the 1970s when the middle class was gone. There was no middle class in New York City. And so the state said, okay, we're going to give tax breaks to developers to build market rate housing, because if it's new, nice market rate housing, we can bring back a middle class into New York and help strengthen that tax base. Well, it's 2022. It's not the 1970s anymore. Like, times have changed, and there is a solid middle class in the city of New York. And we're still giving tax breaks to private real estate developers to build all this market rate housing. And every single time you build a new building that's full of market rate housing, what you're doing is that you're driving up the rents in all the buildings surrounding that new building. You're driving up the rents and you're displacing people and you're driving them into homelessness. So the housing issue is the number one issue that needs to get addressed. We're not in the 1970s anymore. We're in 2022, and we've got to reform those programs because we can't continue to give our taxpayer dollars to private real estate developers so that they can build housing for the middle class. Like, what about the working class, right? Like, what about, you know, the average New Yorker that is making the minimum wage of $15 an hour? Sure, that increased, but the costs keep going up every single day. Things keep getting more expensive.
It negates it.
Say that again.
It negates it.
It negates it.
Yeah, it negates it.
It totally negates it. You increase, you know, you increase the minimum wage, but everything keeps going up. It drives people into homelessness. It drives people to leave the city is what you're going to start seeing. So that, and eventually, if we don't put a stop to this, we're going to be a city where there is no working class. Like, that's what New York is going to become, because it's simply become way too expensive for the vast majority of working class people to live in. You know, one thing that I'm very optimistic about is that there's a growing strength in the labor movement, right? Let's go back to the fact that I studied industrial and labor relations. At one point in this country, the private sector was unionized at a rate of close to like 35%. We're down to only about 7% of our private sector working class is unionized. You know, I appreciate what I'm seeing, you know, out in on Staten Island, where they managed to unionize that Amazon warehouse. You're seeing Starbucks are starting to be unionized. I was reading today about a Chipotle that was unionized, right? We need more good union jobs, because that, as somebody who works at a labor union, I can tell you it guarantees health benefits, not only for yourself, but for your family and for your kids. It's what provides you with retirement, a safe retirement, whether that's a pension or a 401k, so that you can retire comfortably at 65 and you're not working till you're, 80 years old, so that you can survive, right? It also guarantees you a living wage, not $15 an hour like a minimum wage. We're talking about a living wage, $20, $21, $22, $25 an hour, where you can actually take a vacation and afford a vacation. Everyone should be able to take a vacation and afford one, right? Like, to me, it blows my mind that we have a working class where all we say is work harder, work more, work harder, work more, and we don't even give them an opportunity to have a moment off or a moment to take vacation. So I'm actually very optimistic by all the unionization that we're seeing. Hopefully, we can start increasing the amount of private sector workers that are unionized, because I think that could provide, a lot of families some economic mobility in our city that's desperately needed.
Absolutely. Great point. Excellent point. And, getting back to, right, you just mentioned homelessness. And I know homelessness is something that's very, it's something that you're passionate about. Mm-hmm. And it means something to you, which I can appreciate, because you see it now. In New York, you see them everywhere. The homelessness is unbelievable right now. What do you kind of got into it, but what do you attribute that to, number one? And number two, what are some of the things you would try to do to help combat that and bring that down some?
It goes back to the point that we're giving tax breaks to developers so that they can go build Hudson Yards, so that they can go build more skyscrapers in Midtown Manhattan. Yet when you and I get on the subway, what we see is more and more homeless people every single day. You go on a Sunday morning on any subway, and easily there are 6 to 7 homeless people living in every single car of every single subway that's coming through. And the fact that that's where we are is really disappointing. And we need to do something. Like, we can't just continue to allow the state to give private real estate developers more and more money to continue to build all this market rate housing when we have a serious homelessness problem. So number one, we got to reform that 421A program that I'm telling you about. We can't continue to give these tax breaks so that they can build market rate housing. If we're going to give them tax breaks, then it has to be for affordable housing. We need to build more affordable housing, not market rate housing. That's one. And then two, we need to build more supportive housing. So supportive housing is where, if you're homeless, there's an intersectionality between homelessness and so many other issues, such as substance abuse, There's a whole host of issues. By the time you end up in a condition where you are homeless, there are a whole other host of issues that are probably affecting your life. And so what supportive housing can do is that you have the professionals right in the building that can provide the services that that homeless person needs, so that we can find a way to get them out of homelessness and then becoming productive members of our society, right? Giving them access to the health care that they need, giving them access to possibly a job where they can, make a living and start getting themselves back on their feet. And so I believe in building more supportive housing as well in our city, because that's the way that you get somebody who's hit homelessness and get them to becoming productive members of our society again.
Absolutely. And I feel like it's all relative. Like I feel like it all goes together. Which is why now I'm going to ask you about public safety.
Mm.
What are your thoughts on public safety, and what would you do to help, kind of bring some change in that regard? Because let's be honest, since the pandemic, even before the pandemic, but since the pandemic, things have really gotten rough. I mean, especially subway crime is up, attacks are up, gun violence is up.
Things have gotten very chaotic in our city, and we do have to rein it in. I think number one, we have to admit that there's a problem. We have to admit that we have a public safety problem, right? Like when I talk to working class New Yorkers, they are afraid of getting on the subway. They are afraid of walking at night. Like we have to say there is a problem and we have to do something about said problem, right? I think a lot of the violence that we're seeing is related to mental health issues. One of the problems that can be fixed at the state level is that for decades, we've allowed for the Department of State to allow the private hospitals to shut down their psych units. We literally just don't have services anymore in the city of New York. They've allowed for them to shut them down in New York, in the city, allow the private hospitals to convert them into other units that are far more profitable than running a psych unit, and then relocate them to some places in upstate New York, right? Like that trend needs to stop. We need to reverse that course. And we need to make sure that these private hospitals reopen their psych units so that we can provide more services to people. Because a lot of this violence that we're seeing playing out on the streets is related to mental health. In addition to that, I often get on the subway, and there is an increase in police presence, but just because you have more presence doesn't necessarily mean that there's more safety. There's a lot that's going on, and I'm not really seeing, I see a lot of folks on their phones, texting and talking to one another and not really doing much to make sure that people feel safe again, right? Just because you're present doesn't mean that you're going to create a safe environment. You have to take action. And so, there's a conversation that I think needs to be had with the police force where it's like, we want to feel safe. Like we want you to offer the safety. However, we're also asking you not to abuse your power. Like there's no need for you to believe that you're above the law and you're above another person. We're simply asking you to enforce the rules in a way that is humane, in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're superior to anybody else, but also provides the safety that people need.
There you go. That's another interesting subject right there, because now what would you do? What, if anything, do you believe can be done to kind of bridge that gap, to kind of mend those fences, if you will, right? Because we've seen what's gone on in this country over, obviously, throughout the whole history of the country, right? But especially the past couple years with everything. I don't have to get into all the examples, but what's going on. How can we, with the inner city, the communities of the inner city, communities of color, and the police in general, how can we mend those fences so that these residents can feel safe, and the police officers also can, also feel like they can do their job and do it in a safe manner? What do you feel about that?
We do have to go back to the idea of community policing. I think it's effective, and I think we were making serious gains in that space here in New York City. There were a lot of community policing programs that have been put into place before the pandemic. I think we were doing a very good job. The pandemic hit and it turned the world upside down and created a lot of chaos. But I think that we need to go back to those community policing models that we were already working on and start and feed them work on them with fidelity. Let's go back to where we were, because I do think that they were working. I do, having more cops that are just walking the beat, getting to know that, who know the neighbors, know who people are, building that relationship, right? If you have a relationship that's established and it's strong between the police force and the local community, you build more trust, right? And so I think we just need to go back and implement those programs that we had already been working on. Because remember, our city was feeling super safe before the pandemic, and we had plenty of that community policing that was happening. And I just think we need to go back to those days. We need to go back and let, community working in hand with the police force, so that we feel safe again. Because I'm going to be quite honest, people do not feel safe right now. The number one issue I hear on the streets when I'm knocking on doors and I'm talking to people is I don't feel like I can get on the subway safely, and I don't feel like I can walk around at night safely. It's a real problem.
I echo those sentiments as well, because and I've noticed, I've even talked about, with other people, I've felt that I've seen a decrease in police presence. And what I mean by that is what you were saying, right? Just because they're there doesn't mean that because I've seen what you've seen. I've seen the texting, they're just standing there kind of not paying attention. It's about being, and again, it's not criticizing, obviously I'm not saying everyone, but I'm saying there are instances where you see, you're not seeing them necessarily being vigilant in certain instances where they probably should be more aware and alert. So that's a good point that you brought up.
Right.
So let me ask you about, we're going to get more into you as well, because I think your story is fascinating. I want to commend you, because I feel that having read about you, your story is very unconventional. What you were able to do as an educator, and you decided, you're like, I'm going to go into public service. I'm going to do this. Like, it seems, just from on the surface, it seems like you've gone against the grain every step of the way, and nothing has stopped you. Where do you get this tenacity from?
Listen, I get it from my parents. They showed up to this country. They were formerly undocumented. We spent about 7 years undocumented. And none of that deterred them ever from pursuing that dream that they came here for. That dream of achieving an American dream, which is a betterment, an economic betterment of life for your family and for yourself. And, it was seeing my parents wake up every single day at 5 o'clock in the morning, going to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning, day in, day out, not taking a single day of vacation, right? Like, they made the ultimate sacrifice by leaving their family, their friends, their food, their culture. You leave everything behind when you immigrate. And you can't take that for granted. That means the world to me. And that's where I get it from. It's like, I've seen what my parents had to do to succeed in this country. I can't take that in vain. I can't take advantage. I have to make sure that I prove to the world that means something, right? That all that work and that sacrifice and that dedication is meaningful. And I know that story is not just my story. There are so many other families in Northern Manhattan and across the city of New York. I mean, Latinos were majority of it. I mean, we're immigrants, right? Whether you immigrated in the 50s, the 60s, the 80s, we immigrated here, right? And we're becoming we're about a third of the city's population.
Wow.
And I know that my story is not just my story. There's a lot of other families who came here looking for that American dream and are doing whatever they can to give their kid the best education that they can possibly give, to better their lives as much as they possibly can. And I want to be able to say to the world, like, this is happening. Like, this is real. And these are the sacrifices that people are making. And so, yeah, I mean, and so that's kind of like that drive. That's where I get that tenacity. It's really just like every sacrifice that I've seen my parents make to get to where we are.
Yeah, and a lot of people can relate to that as well. I mean, I certainly, some of the things that you've gone through and that you've done, I can relate to it on, my parents motivated me too, just seeing them and how they persevered and stuff too. So I can relate to in that regard. So you identify as openly gay.
Yep.
What challenges, if any, have you faced along the way into getting to where you're at, and obviously trying to get to the next steps to where you are, to
Yeah,
where you
I
want
mean,
to be?
listen. Yeah, I mean, listen. As somebody who's openly gay, middle school, high school, not the easiest place, not the easiest space for somebody. And I was closeted through college because of that fear, right? And I wasn't able to fully realize myself and be completely who I am during my formative years. It wasn't until I graduated college that I felt comfortable enough, and even then, I didn't even do it here. Part of the reason why I moved to Denver, Colorado, was because I needed some space for my own family and friends where I could become comfortable with who I am and tell that new part of me, right? That new story in a new space with new friends. Because of the fear, right? Like I didn't know what if there was going to be retaliation or retribution. Fortunately for me, there hasn't been, right? Like my parents were very accepting. My parents, I never, it never became a problem. Like, right. I came out to them after I moved out to Denver, Colorado, and it hasn't been a problem. But, I wasn't allowed to live my full self throughout my formative years because of the fear. I mean, Latinos, we tend to come from pretty conservative families where this could be a big deal in a family
Yes,
where
yes.
I've seen families, I've seen parents disown kids over this. I'm fortunate enough where that did not happen with me, where my parents, met me with open arms, and it's been an amazing journey. I live in Washington Heights with my partner. My parents are really good friends with him. Like I can say that I am happy that we've been making a lot of progress. And I know that there are a lot of LGBTQ Latinos out there who also need to have someone like me be a representative and say, let's break down this barrier. Let's break down this taboo. It doesn't need to exist, right? And that's part of my journey too. I want to break down that barrier. I want to make sure that families, and particularly in the Latino community, become comfortable with the LGBTQ community and become comfortable with taking pride in who their kids are, regardless of their sexuality.
That's no, listen, that's outstanding. When I read that and reading your story, obviously your story is what impresses me in its totality. But just your transparency, you're putting it all out there. And what I mean by that is you talked about your parents, you talked about, right, your experiences, even in some of your bio, you moved to Denver. You did, like, you put it all out there. And I think that transparency is super important because that's not something you didn't have to disclose all that. And the
Right.
fact that you decided to, like, this is me, right? This is Angel Vasquez, and I'm in public service, and you came back home. You could have stayed in Colorado.
Sure could have.
Honestly, that would have been so much easier, right? If you would have just stayed in Colorado. Hey, listen, cost of living is low, right? It's
Hmm.
lower, going up, but it's still lower than here, right?
Hmm.
Hey, decent weather, okay. Snows in certain parts, you get cold, but they get seasons. Nice weather, nice place. You're not too far from LA if you want to go to LA. I mean,
Yeah.
right? You could
Yeah.
have just stayed there, go watch. I don't know if you're into sports, watch I don't know, Colorado Rockies baseball game, whatever.
Yeah.
But right? But you came back home because that's where your heart is.
And
And
that
you put it right, you put it all out there.
that's always been my number one driver, right? It's this community, knowing that there are so many kids here, so many families in these neighborhoods of uptown Manhattan that have so much need, and I want to just be able to take everything that I have learned, gathered academically and professionally, and just pour it into this community, because there's so many parents here, so many families that are working class, that are making sacrifices day to day, and it doesn't have to be that way. We can better their lives. We can find ways to give them access to economic mobility. Just you need the right representative that's going to go up to Albany, right, and try to unlock that for these families, because they deserve nothing but the best.
Absolutely well said. Before we wrap up, I just talk to us about La Unidad. What is it? La Unidad Latina Foundation.
Sure.
I really, because I saw that, I read about it, but I know something about it, but I want everyone to know about it. So
Okay.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm also a member of what's called La Unidad Latina Lambda Upsilon Lambda Fraternity Incorporated. It is a Latino fraternity that was founded at Cornell University in 1982. I became a member when I was a student at Cornell, and I pledged in spring 2008. La Unidad Latina Foundation, it's one of the philanthropic arms of the fraternity. And so the idea is the foundation was established in 1999, originally to provide scholarships to Latino students enrolled in undergraduate and graduate institutions, to support them financially, because we found that a lot of our students drop out, Latino students drop out of college and graduate studies because they simply can't afford to continue to move on. And so some of the brothers of the fraternity did was that they started this foundation to provide some scholarships. Since then, we've actually added a college access program. So we actually take high school students here in New York City and we guide them through the college application process to try to get them into the top schools in the country. So try to aim to get them into the Ivy League schools, the top 100 schools in this country. So we have the college access, and we also do scholarship giving. The scholarship giving is once a year. Applications start in September 1st, and we announce our winners in December. And then the college access program kind of runs year round. We try to recruit as many freshmen as possible so that we're guiding them from their freshman year through their entire senior year.
That is, I'm telling you, when I read about that, that was outstanding. And I just thought to myself, I need him to come on here and explain this, because, you don't know who you can inspire with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was super important for you to say that, because, those are opportunities that myself growing up not too long ago, late 90s, early 2000s, in the 90s and 2000s, where those opportunities weren't there, or I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And so
well,
it's important.
And I serve as the chair of the board. We do have an executive director that helps manage the day-to-day operations, but I serve as the chair of the board, doing, taking the lead on the fundraising effort so that we can give out those scholarships every single year, and we can help those students through the college application process year to year.
Outstanding. I read that, and that to me is what it's all about. Like, that's something that I really like. It hit me, because we need more things like this.
Yep.
For our people. And I look at that, I said, man, this is it. This right here is what we need. Now let's get like another 100,000 of these programs to the country, and you see a big change. So before we wrap up,
sure,
I want you have a very big, important battle coming up. I call it a battle. It's not really a battle, right? But June 28th, talk to us. This is your time now. This is your floor. Talk to us about what's coming up June 28th. This is your pitch.
Yeah, so Santos, something that I need to provide as an update real quick, though, is that just 2 days ago, the highest court in New York State ruled that the maps, right? We just went through a redistricting after the census, that the maps that were drawn by the legislature were actually unconstitutional. They drew them in ways, the legislatures themselves, right? The incumbents, the senators and the assembly members, drew these maps in ways to protect themselves as incumbent. So they gerrymandered the districts so that they were selecting their electorate, right? It wasn't taking into consideration or prioritizing the actual voters. It was allowing the incumbents to draw districts in their own favor. And so, there was an independent commission that had been set up, and they sent out a set of maps for my particular district. The district that the independent redistricting commission put together for me would have been close to 70% Latino, because the federal law says that you're supposed to protect and compact minority votes wherever possible. So this district was actually supposed to be close to 70% Latino. And what the incumbent decided to do behind closed doors in backroom deals was that they drew a district where the population of Latino went down to 51% and had the Upper West Side as a part of the district. Now, wow. I don't know if you've been in Upper Manhattan, but Washington Heights and Inwood is no Upper West Side.
No.
And so, it's
redlining.
It's a strategy to, dilute the Latino voice, dilute the Latino power. And it's a strategy that's been used year after year. And so the court, thankfully, ruled that district line is unconstitutional. So now there's an expert that's coming in, and they're calling it a special master, and they're going to draw these lines all over again. And my hope is that they're actually going to follow the federal laws around this and make sure that this district becomes a super Latino district. But with that said, my election now officially as of today is actually moving to August 23rd. They're going to give us an additional 2 months because the district lines are just going to look different. So I am going to end up campaigning in a completely different space where, you know, my district may have areas of the Bronx now. I don't know, right? Like we have to wait to see what the maps are going to show. But the election is now August 23rd. Okay. But what I can say is that I'm going to continue to do this campaign work. I'm going to continue to raise the money that I need. If anyone wants to join me in this journey, you can just go on my website, vasquezforsenate.com. You can sign up as a volunteer. You can get my newsletter right there. Again, vasquezforsenate.com. Listen, our representation matters. Latinos, we make up 30% of the city's population. However, when you look at our leadership in the state level, it's lacking. We don't even have a single Latino commissioner in New York State. At the city level, it's the same. And so our representation matters and our voices matter. And I think we need to make sure we do whatever we can to get as many Latino, particularly young Latinos, elected. That's another piece that's, you know, wrong with, that I particularly find that's wrong with our party. I'm running as a Democrat. You know, it's time to allow young people to fill these leadership posts. We have to be given the opportunity.
I've seen it. It's getting old. There's a lot of, I know who they are. I'm not going to mention them. I respect everybody, but I know who they are. I follow it closely. They're pretty old. It's time to get new ones.
And it's important to give us young, young professionals the opportunity to get that institutional knowledge that we need, because we are going to be the future. We are the ones who are going to be, you know, governing our state. We're the ones who are going to be in those positions at one point or another. And so, you know, I think we need to make sure that we are electing young leaders as well, because we know what the current day struggle is, and we need more young representation. We need more Latino representation, and needless to say, we also need LGBTQ representation at the state level, particularly Latino LGBTQ, so that we make sure that our entire, the entire Latino diaspora the entire Latinidad is being well represented by somebody.
Excellent point. Well, so now we know it. Now it's in August, right? So that gives you more time, though. Now
it gives me more time. It gives me more time, and it gives me more time to recruit folks who want to volunteer, who may want to contribute, and it gives me more time to go out there and meet voters.
Outstanding. Angel Vasquez, I appreciate you coming on so much. Thank you. It was great listening to your story. Really great story, great stuff. Really, I really, I'm pulling for you. I know you're gonna do good things, and I will be watching. And I look forward to seeing what you have coming up next.
Thank you. I appreciate you taking the time for having me here today, and I appreciate you for interviewing me. This has been great. It's been phenomenal. Anything you need, just give me a call, send me an email.
Yes, sir.
Let's make sure we stay in touch.
We will. Yes, we will stay in touch. Thank you very much, Angel Vasquez. And thank you very much. We'll talk soon.
All righty. Have a good one.
All right. Wow. So that was so interesting. I think, I want to thank Angel Vasquez. It was a great interview. I look forward to seeing what he does next. And look, it's more stories of perseverance. It's representation matters. Okay. I don't care what background you're coming from. I don't care from what walk of life. Representation matters. You want to feel like, America is about multiple ethnicities, religious backgrounds, creeds, races, etc. And so it's about everybody having that representation, regardless of what religion, which sexual orientation, whatever it may be, male, female, gender neutral, etc. So I want to thank my guests, obviously. Thank you to Angel Vasquez. And you guys like this video? If you're watching on YouTube, give it a like. You're listening on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Stitcher, iHeart, etc. Listen, tell your friends all about it. And that was episode number 42. That's all I got for right now. But make sure to follow me on social media: Instagram, Santos Thread Shop, TikTok, Santos Thread Shop. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and away we go. And as always, Don't just say what you mean or mean what you say. Say it with your chest.